This is an M2 iPad Pro, and last night it made me late for bed. There's a really good reason for this. If you've watched this channel for any amount of time, you'll know that I've got a bit of a history with the M2 iPad Pro. Basically, I bought one with the full intention of reviewing it and then didn't open it and sent it back to Apple. And since then, I've just moaned incessantly about the lack of Final Cut Pro for the iPad Pro. And more specifically, Apple's seeming lack of desire to really make use of the M2 and the M1 chip they keep putting inside these iPads. But last night I got to bed late because of this M2 iPad Pro, which yes, I have bought again. And no, it wasn't because it wasn't working or because I was making my 50-second video about how I want Final Cut Pro on the iPad. It was because I was having a play with DaVinci Resolve on the iPad, which is a video editing app, and I couldn't put it down. In fact, I'd go as far to say it was the most exciting technology experience I've had since I unboxed the Apple Watch Ultra last year. I'm not going mad. This really happened, and I think I've worked out why we haven't seen Final Cut Pro on the iPad just yet. Let's get into it straight after this week's sponsor. And today's video is sponsored by Pitaka, who makes some fantastic iPad accessories. There's two that I'm going to show you today. The first one is the Mag-EZ Case Pro, and this is part of the world's first iPad magnetic ecosystem, which Pitaka call Pitaflow. And basically you get this case, which is a fantastic case in its own right. It's made from aramid fiber to make it an ultra slim and very lightweight design. It's smooth textured, it's got a very comfortable grip, and it's got a built-in USB-C charging port. And basically when you place your iPad Pro into this case, you attach that little USB-C dongle thing at the bottom, and what that does is use this little X on the back to charge your iPad. In the box you get a little charging puck that you can put anywhere on your bedside table, on your desk, and then you can place your iPad on top of that to make it charge. But my absolute favourite thing about this is that you can then attach the iPad Pro to the Mag-EZ charging stand. And I've got one of these to the right of my studio display. It means I can basically put my iPad there, have it ready to use it as a second monitor, and ensure the battery is always charged up. I love this thing. It's also compatible with the Magic Keyboard case, as you see there. Still closes, and it's just fantastic. And as you can see, I have another accessory here, and this is the Flipbook case from Pitaka, which basically turns your iPad literally into a case. It's woven with Carbitex Omniflex carbon fiber and premium leather. It's got these magnetic handles at the top, which are very useful, very secure as well. I don't worry about the iPad Pro in this at all. And it barely adds any weight. It just turns it into this brilliant little carryable case, which you can just open up very quickly and get to work. I'll put links to both of these in the description, and thank you very much to Pitaka for sponsoring this video. I'm a Final Cut Pro user. I have been for many, many years, and because I'm completely obsessed with process and efficiency, I've never felt tempted to try anything else. Now, when it comes to the Mac content that I make for this channel, that's not really a big deal because most of my audience, you guys, aren't that interested in video editing. I know some of you are, but it's not a big enough group of people to make it worth my while trying out DaVinci Resolve, Premiere Pro, and comparing all those against Final Cut Pro. The iPad, though, is a different matter, and that's because the creative potential of the iPad seems to be of interest to a much wider audience. And that's why whenever I make a video about the iPad Pro and say, oh, I wish they had Final Cut Pro on it, where is it, why isn't Apple doing anything with the M2 chip, yada yada yada, most of you say get DaVinci Resolve and at least try video editing on the iPad Pro. The problem is that I've completely blinded myself with this obsession that I have for Apple to release Final Cut Pro on the iPad. And this has given me a really blinkered view of what's going on, but I've finally dropped that. I've put my money literally where my mouth is, and, well, I've tried out DaVinci Resolve on the M2 iPad Pro, and I'm fast coming to the conclusion that Apple has no interest in launching Final Cut Pro on the iPad, and I'm no longer angry about it. I bought this last week with one goal in mind, and that was to start editing videos on this on DaVinci Resolve. Now, I didn't want to do it for this channel because there's too much riding on Mark Ellis reviews, but I do have a second channel now, which is called Mark's Solo Club. If you've not checked that out yet, I'll put a link in the description. But it's very early days for that channel, so I can take a few more risks. I can put in place a completely different editing process. Those videos are just me talking to the camera like this. There's no B-roll. There are 2 cameras involved, but you can do multicam editing on DaVinci Resolve on the iPad. Now, I've not had time to edit a complete video on DaVinci Resolve just yet, but as I say, last night I was up until way too late playing around with it with my own footage. And bearing in mind I've never used DaVinci Resolve before in my entire life, it felt fairly familiar. And I think the reason for that is that they've used this, I think they call it the cut page, which is a certain page within DaVinci Resolve, which basically makes it feel like Final Cut Pro. Blackmagic Design, who are behind DaVinci Resolve, have confirmed that it's the exact same code base pretty much as the desktop version, so you're not getting a watered down version of DaVinci Resolve on the iPad. And because of that M2 chip, it is super fast. This is 4K 10-bit footage from this camera, which is a Sony FX3, and it just blasts through it, no problem at all. They've also used the new hover feature on the Apple Pencil, where without touching the display, you can basically motion the pencil across these clips and scrub through them. That's actually really handy. It's not at all gimmicky. It's got all of the really fancy color grading stuff in DaVinci Resolve, which again, I've got no experience of whatsoever, so I haven't got a clue what I'm doing with this. It's all there. The most impressive thing with this, like I mentioned right at the start of this video, is that I felt excited about the iPad Pro. I felt completely inspired by what this could do for my business. It just feels like a new, I can't believe I'm saying this, a new era for the iPad Pro. And I think Apple's willingness to put DaVinci Resolve front and center on the M2 iPad Pro's landing page speaks volumes about their plans for Final Cut Pro. Why bother investing all of that time, money, effort, and development resources into completely redeveloping Final Cut Pro for the iPad when Blackmagic Design have done it already? What you're looking at here is basically Final Cut Pro for the iPad with different terminology and color grading on steroids. I do have concerns, obviously. This is a completely new app, so I've got to learn it from the ground up. Audio editing, effects, all the plugins and stuff that I use for Final Cut Pro, will they be available on this? Will I need to get new stuff in? So on that note, I'd like to ask you a favor. If you've been using DaVinci Resolve on the iPad Pro, and like me, you've come from Final Cut Pro, give me your best tips and tricks and things that I really need to be aware of in the comments. And it's worth noting that this is part of a much bigger project where I'm going pretty much iPad only. And if you want to see what that's all about, keep watching for a link to a video where I explain exactly why I'm doing that and what I'm frightened of.